The Moors invade Christian Iberia. They push it back and make their own kingdoms. But Iberians slowly push back. The Christian inhabitants is not going to put up with it. Slowly, over the years, about 770 years, almost 800 years, they began to push back. They began to change the landscape back to Christianity. The Muslims invented great things, created great advancements, but those were going to be Christian lands. Today we're going to be looking at the soldiers and the kind of weapons that would have been used. Just a basic breakdown, basic weapons. Not everything may be 100% historically accurate, but it's just going to be a breakdown of what these soldiers would have used and how they would have fought, the kind of weaponry that you would have seen. So here we begin, and you can see that I got an array of weapons. Spears and throwing spears, mainly throwing spears that would be used, as well as fighting spears. And you can see right here the end of this spear and how you can use it. The front of it's pretty long and you can fight with it. It's very versatile, and as well it's very effective against light armors, and they also had spears that were very heavy. Now these kind of weapons would have been used on both sides. Throwing spears, javelins, projectiles of all sorts. The Muslims would have had their own stuff and the Christians would have had theirs. But in the struggle and the ages of the frontier, they would have moderated their stuff. They would have used each other's techniques and weaponry. They would have adapted it to each other. So here we look at a buckler shield. And you see right here how effective it is to just block and strike, block and strike, and as well use the back end. And you can use two hands with the buckler because it's very simple. This buckler is made out of steel. So these are just one of the weapons that would have been used. The buckler is very ancient. It would have been available throughout the entire Reocnquista and all over medieval Europe. But the light soldiers of Iberia would have used the buckler very well. So here's just a basic javelin. You can see by the end right here, it's basic forge. And only the end's going to be specialized. It's just going to be a basic stick, and it's just going to be heavy at the end. And it's not really that armor penetrating, but it's something that you can launch off horseback against light infantry, lightly armored infantry. Very effective. So you don't use the back, you just throw the spear, and you can as well fight with it a little bit and stab. So there's going to be a demonstration of throwing the spear. So here we're going to move on to the longsword. Now this would have been used in the later periods, and you can compare it to a regular arming sword. These are cold steel swords. And you can see right there that one of them is a hand and a half, or a long sort of two-handed sword, and it has a longer handle for two hands, and as well a longer blade. So you can see right here as I handle it a little bit, keeping a high guard is very good. It keeps good advantage. You'll see that the longsword is a specialized weapon. It takes a lot of training, but it's also very easy to adapt to because you can use two hands. A single-handed sword is very easy to wield, of course, and use, but it takes much more skills, different kind of skills. The longsword, once you get the idea of it, you learn pretty fast, and you can see right there how versatile it is. I can use everything on this sword. as well with the single-handed sword, but for this sword, you get much more power in it. So you can see the kind of defenses, the kind of blocks. You wouldn't need a shield for this kind of sword. And the kind of fighters that would have wielded this would have been light infantry as well, but mostly heavy infantry with plate armor or heavy armor. But even then, light infantry would have been just well with a sword like this. And because of the two hands, it would have been very good to wield for a long time. You wouldn't have been tired as easy as the single-handed sword, and you get a lot of good defense out of that. As you can see, and you can also half sword. There's techniques. Half swording is very good for puncturing between the cracks of the armor or light parts of the armor, or through chainmail, or through, let's just say, heavy padding that may bend your blade and break it. There's a lot of factors that you gotta worry about. And a long sword is a very good sword to go with, but it's a sword that is very expensive. It's a sword as well that it's very powerful, but once you get the skill done, once you train with it well enough, and you get the hang of it, you become comfortable with it, it's one of the best weapons that you can have on a battlefield. But you gotta remember that you have to focus on how you're gonna use your swords. So not all swords are for every battlefield, even though they would be good for every kind of opponent. So you can see that I can use the javelin a little bit as I use my sword, and you can use this sword as well as a single-handed sword. So now we look at the arming sword, and you can see right there it's a folded sword, just like the two-handed sword, or at least for this version of cold steel. And you can see right there that I can hold a pistol grip, or I can just hold it regular grip. And right here I'm going to show you a little bit of a demonstration on how this works. A sword like this, you really have to use a lot of footwork. For all your weapons you have to use a lot of footwork. But especially swords like this that are a little bit more heavier. They're almost just as heavy as the two-handed swords, if not as heavy, sometimes even heavier. But some two-handed swords would have been big, but the regular two-handed swords, or hand and a halves, would have weighed basically the same as a single-handed sword. But you can see that I have to use my entire body for this. I have to be very confident when I use this single-handed sword. And I will be very good without a shield when it comes to fighting a two-handed sword. But once again, I have to learn how to fight a two-handed sword. I have to learn how to use these swords very well. They take a little bit more skill to use and a very strong person. So you're going to see right here, we're going to use a sword and a shield. Not a sword and a buckler, but it's going to be a small shield that you can sling over your arm. And you can see right here. And I'm going to be showing some demonstrations on what it looks like. So you see right there the shield, it's very effective. Especially when it's slung over your arm, it's very durable, very strong, and it is well very fortified. It takes heavy blows, very good blows, but you gotta make shields like this very thick, because they're not just bucklers that can easily be smashed out of your hand. A good axe can go through a shield like this, so you want it to be very thick and very well reinforced, very good for taking heavy blows. But you can see right here how a sword and a buckler is almost a perfect weapon, and when it comes to a two-handed sword will rarely defeat a very good sword and shield or sword and buckler, especially one that's fortified like the one that I'm using right now. A very good opponent will defeat almost anything with a shield and a sword. So here we're going to show you another shield, another one that you sling over your arm, not a buckler, kind of like a Taj. And you see right here, this would be a good archer's shield. And this would have been a more earlier style shield. So here we look at as well an arming sword, or a knightly sword, but it is going to be like an older version, a shorter version. This one actually broke from a very long, good single-handed sword, and I transformed it into this, so it resembles more an earlier period. And you can see right there how effective it is. A sword and a shield. And this combo would have resembled more an earlier age, where the shields kind of look more Viking or more Celtic, more ancient, with the basic boss and the wooden shield part. Very good for defense, very effective, very good for archers, effective against protecting against archers. But once again, it is made out of wood, so it is very easily destroyed by axes, maces, very good swords and thrusts, but it's still enough to defend you. So that was a demonstration of a sword and a shield, or at least for that particular sword that is much more shorter than a typical arming sword. So right here we got a saber. This would have been more resembling the Muslim era or the later eras of the Renaissance and the early musket periods, when people used to fight just with muskets and bayonets. They would have had swords like this. So this is an actual Condor large machete style saber, much more lighter than an actual saber, a little bit more shorter. I got a real saber, but right now I'm getting it repaired and I'm getting it polished up and fixed up because it's not in very good condition, so I'm just using this one. And of course they would have had light sabers like this, shorter sabers, because not every sword is the same. Today we just make replicas and make the swords resemble what they used to look like, or the manuals that we see, we just kind of copy those swords. But you got to remember that people of all different sizes and shapes and strengths would have had different kind of swords, and they would have had custom swords. So right here you see how I use the saber. I try to mimic how they used it in the Muslim period, even though I'm not very familiar with it. But over the years of using swords, I've kind of gotten the hang, and from what I've seen and what I've learned from sabers and the Asian styles, and as well the Eastern European styles and the later styles away from the Renaissance, this would have been a very good style. And you kind of get the hang of it, you kind of feel it out, and you see what kind of style goes good with this one. It's very versatile, very flexible, very fast, very unpredictable, and repetitive. I can see why a lot of people would use the sabers. They're very effective. You can see right there the speed. But once again, this is a very light blade, so it offers me that ability, and also it's short. It's not lanky and cumbersome. So right here we're going to use it with a shield that you sling over your arm. It's not a buckler. And you can see right there how hard it would have been to deal with an opponent like this, especially if the opponent was lightly armored and you were lightly armored. It's just much more faster, very versatile. And as well, the blade travels when it cuts. You don't have to pull it out, you don't have to thrust it back. It's a very good sword. And it's made as well for crowd control when it comes to a battle. It's a very versatile sword. But I would say that I would prefer a straight blade. But if you were stuck with a saber, this wouldn't be a bad choice. And a lot of people use these swords as their main choice. And I can see why, and I can respect that choice. And I'm going to look more into the saber for the future, because I don't use it very much. But already I can see how good it is, especially if you have a lighter blade and it's much more shorter. It's not big and very cumbersome. But once again, the swords would have been made for their age, made for the opponents that they would have faced. And as armor and the ages would have moderated, so would have your weapons against your opponents, the uses, the blocks, the defenses, the way they were made, the way they were forged. So I hope that you enjoyed the demonstration that I made relating the saber. So right here we got just a regular buckler. It's a wooden buckler. And we're going to be using the typical sword, the shorter sword to my regular arming swords. This would have been about 24 inches. This is 24 inches. The handle's just a little bit longer, so it's just a little bit more of a custom sword for its size. And you can see right there how it would have worked with a buckler. Very excellent combo. And that would have been the European combo. When you get tired with one hand, you can switch it to the other hand, and you can have different uses, make it variable. But it is a very good sword, the arming sword, or the Viking swords, or the spatha that the Romans would have used, and even the gladius, because that's what the arming sword evolved from. The sort of Viking swords, and as well the spatha and the Roman type swords, which the Roman type swords, like the gladius, actually would have been influenced by the Iberian swords. I'll be making videos on those classifications later on. And right here we got a different kind of buckler, a bigger buckler. This is literally the sword and buckler right here. And this is a nice big buckler, and it has a nice big cross on it. It's very nice. It's been beat up quite a bit. The shield's not that heavy, it's not that reinforced, but it does its job. And you can see right there how much protection you get. Now, I may not be making the best demonstrations, but I do got enough skill to show you what they would have looked like. But in the hands of a very good, skilled, war-ready opponent with very good armor, this would have been very hard to get by. If you were this person's opponent, you would have a lot of trouble. If you did not have a good weapon, your own shield, your own protection, and your own techniques against this kind of warfare. So this was back in the day, and it wasn't from a distance with rifles and the kind of stuff that we see today. And I would say much more intense. But we don't fight like that anymore. And that was a demonstration. I hope that all of you enjoyed. And until next time, you take care. Goodbye.